One. We're live now. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Today we are bringing you another episode in your very annual 17 podcast. I said that in Spanish. Sorry about that. But today I am joined by, special scholar. Many people coming here, they are very special, but today we are have the great opportunity to talk with, I'm gonna say just for this one time, Dr. Beverly Roberts Gaventa. But from this point on, I have permission to address her as Beverly. Beverly, how are you doing today?
I am well, Marv. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing just great. Like I told you off camera, I need somebody to pinch me because this is happening. This is real.
Well, it is a treat for me. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me about it. This is an honor to have you on. We're gonna be discussing today a very a topic that is close to my heart, people, because we're gonna have the opportunity to talk about the apocalyptic Paul, and you may not have heard about that perspective or perspectives. Beverly will be addressing our questions today about that, a bit of a history, who are the foremost proponents, which she is among them. Let me tell you that. So we're gonna be discussing about the apocalyptic Paul and everything. So just buckle up because this is a good ride. For that, we're gonna hit the intro right now. Okay. Welcome back. This is your host, Mark, coming to you from Honduras. Yes, you know that, from the bottom of Central America. If you don't know that place, please look it up on your Google Maps. I said that because I understand Honduras is not well known, but you should know it. Today we are bringing you a special topic. But first of all, welcome to this podcast where we get to talk about religion because it's important, okay? But we critically analyze it because that's even more important. Today we are joined by Dr. Beverly Roberts Gaventa, and we're gonna be addressing that very topic in the following minutes. So, Beverly, before we go and get into things, I need to ask you something about your background, your credentials. Who are you? For people who may not know about you or your scholarship, please just give us a bit of a background. That would be okay, just to hear from you.
Okay. I retired just a few years ago after teaching for 8 years, I guess it was, at Baylor University as their distinguished professor of New Testament. Most of my career I spent at Princeton Seminary in New Jersey. My work has in the last 25 years, people know the work I've done on Paul, but that's not, before that, I wrote a commentary on the book of Acts.
Yeah.
I wrote a book on Mary, the mother of Jesus. But the bulk of my work in recent years has been on Paul. Most recently, I published a commentary on Romans in 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which should be showing because I have it right here. Beverly, I understand you also taught at Princeton. Is that true?
Yes, Princeton Seminary. Yes.
Yeah. I'm asking that to you because I understand Princeton is one of those, what do you call it? Uh, Very prestigious, if I can use that word. I will go as far as to say that it's one of the most prestigious theological seminaries, and it has a long-standing history
It does have
in the United States of America.
Excuse
Yeah.
me. It has a
Yeah.
long history of contribution, and I was very grateful to be on the faculty there. It's affiliated, as many people will know, with the Presbyterian Church,
Yeah.
and had a lot of influence. Does have a lot of influence, well beyond the United States,
Oh yeah.
and well beyond Presbyterianism. Now it's become much more globally minded.
Definitely, I agree with that. So, people, you can go and find Beverly's commentary on Romans. This is talking about prestigious, the New Testament Library, published by Westminster Knox Press. This is a very prestigious commentary, Bible commentary. So this is just look at that, 2024. How many pages, Beverly?
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
About 500.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Let's round it up, okay? 600 pages now. But it's quite a commentary, and I remember many people on Facebook, social media, posting when they knew about this, that it was coming out. So many people on social media was talking about it. It was the talk of the town for a while, and I'm not surprised. So people,
Oh, thank
it's affordable. You can go on Amazon or wherever you can get your books. Please, I need to have this book. Help me with my budget because my wish list is widening enough. Much more, much more.
It's also in just a few weeks. It's coming out in paperback.
Oh, so that means it's gonna be even more affordable.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. But it's worth the price, definitely. Okay, thank you for that, Beverly. So now let's go and get into things. As you know, people, as you can see on the thumbnail, she edited a book on the Apocalyptic Paul. So a bunch of scholars with a high profile, they came together and they wrote articles. Um, and finally, they ended up in this edited volume by Beverly. So the main topic is uh, the Apocalyptic Paul. Now, the first time that I read about the apocalyptic, I was a little, true confessions, Beverly. I was a little bit like, what's the word? Because I want to be fair. I was a
Skeptical.
bit of, yeah, exactly. And a bit of like, okay, this is good, but how am I supposed to frame it on my study of the New Testament?
Yeah.
And that's when I started to I received an advice from my mentor to, to go and read some other literature. Of course, the name of James Louis Martin came into the conversation, and Beverly knows why, because he is one of the foremost proponents. So, Beverly, we're gonna go and throw the first questions to you very quick here.
Sure.
And before we can do that, just I mean, can we talk about this is something because I want to be as accurate as possible. But can we talk about a perspective on the apocalyptic pole, or should we say, no, there are a variety of perspectives on the apocalyptic pole? What would you say to that before we can go to the first question?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Marv. And I would
Thank
say
you.
there are multiple perspectives. They have things in common. Sometimes you find people who will talk about the apocalyptic school
Yeah.
or the Martin school or the Union school, because that's where he taught at Union Seminary in New York. And I resist that, as I think he would. Lou was one of my teachers.
Yeah.
And a very dear friend. And I think he would have been quite offended by the notion. Because, first of all, he didn't think of himself that way.
Oh.
He did not have a bloated self-image by any means. But there are a number of people who have shared perspectives, and they say things a little differently, or in some cases a lot differently. But all of them have in common this emphasis on apocalyptic. Now, that goes back well beyond Lou Martin. It goes back really to Albert Schweitzer.
Yeah.
Who at the beginning of the 20th century was not just a physician who went to Africa or a famous organist, right?
Yeah.
But a New Testament scholar.
Yeah.
And one of his important contributions, he made important contributions both to the study of Jesus and of Paul, but one of them was to situate these texts in conversation with Jewish apocalyptic texts, texts that present themselves, I mean, the narrow sense would be texts that present themselves as revelations given directly to a seer, would be one very narrow way
That's
of
right.
thinking about apocalyptic. Then, you skip several decades, and a German scholar by the name of Ernst Käsemann argued prominently that apocalyptic is the mother of all Christian theology.
Yeah.
Now, in a sense, if you go back and read the articles where he argued this, they really don't stand up very well. Because what he wants to argue is that historically we can trace the emergence of theological reflection to an apocalyptic event. And I think there's a kind of cause and effect problem there, and there's a problem of treating the sources in ways that, especially the Gospels.
Okay.
But there is another sense in which I think he was right. Apocalyptic, if you take it in the sense of the understanding of God's action in Jesus as an event, an intrusion, that's a word that will cause some people to get very upset, an intrusion in the world, right? Lou would always talk about invasion, and I have moved away from that as problematic. But intrusion, an action that intrudes in the world as it is, right? So, sorry, I sort of skipped ahead of myself. From Käsemann, what we get is Martin's commentary on Galatians, which was almost, it's a very famous commentary, one of the most famous, I would say, of the 20th century.
Yeah.
But even before him, you get J. Christian Becker, a Dutchman who taught at Princeton. Sorry?
Yeah, I think Becker, it's this book, The Triumph of God.
The Triumph of God. Yes, I'm glad you remembered because I was struggling for it.
No worries. I'm backing you up as much as I can.
Who has a different sort of argument about apocalypse.
Yeah.
He ties it, he ties it more to the resurrection and leans more heavily on Romans and 1 Corinthians. Well, Lou was writing a commentary on Galatians, and he saw apocalyptic elements there, especially with respect to the cross.
Yeah.
So you get these various trajectories. One of the important figures in the next generation, my colleagues, is another Dutchman by the name of Martin de Boer.
Oh yeah.
Who spent more time than most of us have in Jewish apocalyptic literature, and posited that there were different streams, forensic and cosmological, and that Paul is more appropriately aligned with cosmological apocalyptic. There are a number of other people we could talk about. Douglas Campbell, more recently, Alexandra Brown, Lisa Bowen, Susan Eastman, Jamie Davis. I want to come back to him because you asked about things people could read later on. So there's just been a lot of ferment in New Testament studies. And if you don't mind, I'll mention also that one of the exciting things I think about this work is the way it has proven productive for theologians. In the UK, Philip Ziegler. In the US, Nate Carr. In Canada, Doug Herink. In the US, again, the late Walt Lowe. All of these are people who have been influenced by apocalyptic in their constructive theological work.
Yeah. You mentioned Philip Ziegler. Is this the guy who wrote Militant Grace?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I did my homework. Yeah.
Outstanding book. Yeah.
About talking about, and I'm pretty sure you're. I mean, it's something that scholars can help it, but Doe Campbell is a massive commentary. Oh my goodness!
Well, now I don't think of William Campbell as being aligned with the apocalyptic school. I don't think he would.
No, I mean Douglas Campbell from
Douglas.
Duke.
Sorry,
Yeah,
okay. You
yeah,
said
yeah,
commentary, so I went to William, but
yeah.
to Bill. But yes, Douglas likes to write long books.
Yeah, yeah. I'm planning to bring him here on the show as well.
Good.
We're gonna do our best to make that happen.
Good. Good.
So that's that. Thank you for that, Beverly. Because I mean, I think it's and you as a scholar can attest to this. It's very important to know the history, how some interpretation or perspectives have come about. Their proponents along the way, which is very important. So when we remember, I remember in this question, it's right there on your screen. When I say apocalyptic Paul, when you say apocalyptic Paul, what exactly do we mean? Like, okay, apocalyptic, the end of the world, the end of night. Am
Right.
I right to say that,
Right.
or is there something to it that I'm missing, that I'm probably missing?
Yeah. People use the term in different ways, and
Okay.
so much so that some people would contend we just shouldn't use it anymore. And I understand that.
Okay.
You can use it in a quite narrow way, as I mentioned a little earlier, or alluded to earlier, of simply specific texts that that present themselves as apocalypses, like the book of Revelation, which means apocalypse, right? Which is
Yes.
apocalypse.
Yeah.
Or some Jewish texts or other Jewish texts, Fourth Ezra, for example. When I speak about that with respect to Paul, I am not claiming that Paul's letter to the Romans looks like or is by genre an apocalypse. It's not. What I'm saying is that it is steeped in apocalyptic thought, by which I mean the conviction, and this is my own sort of definition. I don't necessarily hold anybody else to it, but the conviction that God has acted in Jesus, in the cross and resurrection, as an intrusion in a world that is captive to sin and death. And that God, in the resurrection, in the death and resurrection of Jesus, establishes a victory over sin and death and all the other powers that hold humans captive. So this is a genuine,
very interesting. Yeah,
liberative act.
Yeah.
It's not just about forgiving individual sins, although it would encompass that, but it's about breaking the powers that hold humans captive. And it's, I would say, the beginning. It's certainly not the end. We know that from both the way Paul writes and the way we live, but it establishes God's claim that God will be victorious and that God will redeem humanity from powers that hold it captive.
This is very interesting, Beverly, because I'm a Christian, but I'm very and I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I'm all of that. I'm with you in all of that. But as my motto says here, I'm very critical about religion. I firmly believe that we need to be very critical about our faith. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna throw the whole baby with the bathwater, and faith doesn't work. Faith is nonsense. No, that's nonsense. Saying that is nonsense because, I mean, there's a Bible passage. I don't have the verse and book. I think it's in Ecclesiastes, where I'm remembering in Spanish, I'm not sure in English how it goes, but it's something like God has put eternity in the heart of men, something like that. Which means, in some sense, to me, is that there is something beyond this terrestrial, physical, tangible reality that we can just, with physical senses, we just can't comprehend the magnitude of what that is. So I strongly believe in that. Now, why am I saying this? It's because when it comes to the gospel, I believe that we, the church, have most of the time really come short to what the gospel really is and what it meant in the first century.
Yeah.
Now, with that you're saying, then the gospel becomes more interesting
Mhm.
because there is more to it that we're just missing it.
Yeah.
So with the apocalyptic, you're saying, okay, no, it is about the forgiving of sins, yes, but it's also dealing with powers.
Right.
And I need to ask you this because I've seen this in the literature. I'm not sure. You can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm looking this at the literature that when it comes to sin and death, you people, which proponents of the apocalyptic Paul, you write those names like with capital letters. Is that intentional on your part, or it's just part of the writing process? Is there
Uh,
something to it there?
it's very intentional on my part.
Oh, okay.
Not everybody does this. I do it. I do it in a very particular sense, and sometimes I
Okay.
don't, which I actually have a little discussion of that in the commentary. I
Okay.
believe that I think that for Paul there are sins, right,
Okay.
of various sorts, actions that I do, or actions that I don't do, or you
Yeah.
do, and I would refer to those with the lowercase. When I use the uppercase, it's because I have in mind those places where and I'm talking really specifically about Romans,
Okay.
where Paul speaks of sin and death as entering the world,
Hmm.
as ruling and reigning, as
Yes.
enslaving. And I think that he has a sense of them as, I would call, well, I'm borrowing this from Lou Martin, anti-God powers.
Hmm.
They are really agents. I put that in quotes. And so he's not just talking about the cumulative effect of human beings doing bad things, but this inability we have to get
Mm-hmm.
out from under the world, in a sense, the value, one way of thinking about it is epistemologically. How do I evaluate my world? What are the cultural norms that hold me captive,
Yeah.
hold all of us captive? Or, we could talk in very specific cultural terms
Mm-hmm.
about a commitment to a certain understanding of power,
Yeah.
or to understandings of race, or gender, or or money, all of which I think are not individual decisions, but are things by which we are very much controlled. Now, Paul wasn't thinking about that necessarily,
Yeah.
but the language he uses and the way that the way he images it as a kind of power, I find very pertinent to our time.
Definitely. One last thing, comment on this, Beverly, before we go with the next question. Uh, do you think when you say those agents, evil agents, anti-God agents, does Paul is that another way to talk about the principalities and powers that he often mentions in his letters? Like they are ruling in the darkness, pulling the strings behind the curtain. They
yeah,
are the real powers behind the political entities.
yeah. I do not subscribe to the notion that Paul is talking about empire, which was not your question, but
Oh,
some
okay.
people would see it that way.
Hmm.
I think that there may be many human agents who are used, as Paul would
Yeah.
say, by these anti-God powers.
Hmm.
And some days that might be me, right? So
Or
the,
me.
yeah, the problem with limiting it to
Yeah.
the empire, either then or now, right,
Hmm.
is I kind of let myself off the hook. I let this
Oh.
be about somebody else, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not about my own complicity,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, let's go with the second question, Beverly, if you
Okay.
will. So, I love this one.
Yeah.
I love this one. Yeah, because this is a book chapter that you wrote back in the day. I think it was
It was a long time
2006.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, 2007, in a book that is called Paul and Jesus Reconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And you wrote about interpreting the death of Jesus, the big guy, apocalyptically.
Right.
So again, you once wrote on Romans 8:32 where you suggest interpreting the deaths of Jesus apocalyptically. In light of your new commentary on Romans, which we already put it right there, people, so you can see it, has the argument stayed the same? That's my question. But please expand. Tell us what was the argument in that book chapter that you wrote back then.
Yeah, I think it has stayed the same. I mean, I did not have a chance to go back and compare them closely, but here's what I was picking up in that passage.
Okay.
You know, Paul says there, and I didn't bring it up, and I want to be sure that I don't misquote it because I know you'll catch me out. Paul speaks about God who did not spare his own son,
Yeah.
but handed him over for all of us.
Yeah.
Now, for the most part, I've heard that described as God's loving giving up, right? And I don't dispute that there's love involved in this, right? That it's
Yes.
sacrificial. But what I draw attention to in that article and in the book, I hope, is those two verbs. When Paul uses the word paradidomi, to hand over,
Okay.
he uses the same word. Well, he uses a word that is in many, many contexts, in Romans, in the Gospels, in other literature, used for handing someone or something over to a third party.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a lot. I provide a fair amount of documentation for this. And back in chapter 1, when he's beginning his argument about sin, he says God handed them over. He
Yeah.
uses the same verb. God
Yeah.
handed them over. Talking about humanity being handed over to a shorthand would be to sin and death.
Mm-hmm.
And then also this other verb, he didn't spare, phatomai, is another word that often appears in contexts having to do with conceding, with surrendering someone to a third party, even in conflict. Right? So based on that and some other elements in the letter, I argue that for Paul, the death of Jesus is not just a sort of forensic event. God hands Jesus over as a substitute, or God hands Jesus over as a sacrifice. But God hands Jesus over, concedes Jesus to these powers for the time being in the death.
Wow.
Which makes the resurrection, to go back to what I said earlier, makes
Yeah.
the resurrection the victory. right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you think about just one more thing, if you think about first
Go ahead. Tell me about it.
Corinthians 2, Paul says, none of the rulers of this age
Yeah.
do this,
Oh,
or they
yeah,
would not
yeah.
have put to death,
They didn't know.
right? The Son of Glory or the King of, I can't. So
Yeah.
I think I think among the ways I would say Paul interprets the death of Jesus is as this event that unmasks and trips and defeats sin and death, and at the same time, I wanted to say this earlier about apocalyptic.
Yeah.
It reveals, right, the corrupt values of the world, right? It reveals the way in which, I mean, if you want to talk about empire, it reveals the way in which the empire values or fails to value. So
I need to say this, Beverly, because when it comes about the death of Jesus, there's a lot to talk, as you better
sure.
know about. It's a lot of to talk. I mean, how many years in the making? Like people interpreting the death of Jesus, 2,000 years and counting.
Yeah.
And still, we came to that table of discussion with proposals, interpretations, and ideas. My mentor used to say, and I'm gonna throw this to you just to know what do you think about that. This is just well, what do you call it? Thought experiment.
Yeah.
So my mentor used to say is that those dark powers, those what do you call it? Spirits who were enslaving the people, humanity, they were present at the crucifixion of Jesus. And he would argue that by he would add two passages, Psalm 22 and that passage that you just quote from Paul. Had the rulers of this world knew what would happen, they would never crucify the Lord of glory.
Lord of glory. Thank you.
And he would say, okay, so these guys, they were sons of God. They were part. I mean, God created them, but they rebelled. They went rogue, and they were not. They were opposing the plan of God that Jesus came into this world to put in action. And they were present at the moment that Jesus was dying because they thought, okay, we're killing God, because they know who Jesus was. I mean, you remember the demons?
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, don't shut it, nip it, don't say it. And my mentor used to say, so Jesus dies, goes into the Hades, he stays there for 3 days, he's preaching whatever, we don't know why he preached, but and he will fill in the blanks, like, speculating. And he would say, okay, he is saying to them, okay, you're gonna be here for the rest of your life until judgment from God comes in, but in 3 days I'm out of here. you will stay. So that, I like the way you say it. The resurrection is the victory.
Yeah. Well, I want to be clear that I'm not advocating quite that kind of picture in Paul, right?
Definitely.
And the thing that's a little maddening is, of course, Paul doesn't give us a biography, or a history of the powers. He's not interested in that. But certainly, I mean, what your account, and not your story, but what you just said, demonstrates that Paul lives in a world where there are, expectations about demons. Everybody knows that, right? And of course, the truth is, many Christians inhabit that expectation today.
Yeah,
we wouldn't have to go far into Christianity in the Southern Hemisphere, right, to find these notions. And it's people like me who have inherited a world in which, supposedly they don't exist. I will back up and say that I think it's interesting that in Romans 8, where Paul lists all those things that won't separate us, he says, from the love of God and Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
One of them is any created thing.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, where sin, not that God created sin, but these powers are, they're nothing compared to God.
No, they're
not.
They're dust.
Yeah. But they're more powerful than we are.
Oh yeah. My mind right now just took me to the Psalm 8. You have made the man a little lower than the angels.
Right.
So yeah, definitely. Okay. Thank you for that, Beverly. Let's move on. Third question today goes like this. Tell us about other examples in the New Testament where some sort of apocalyptic framework has been found operating in the rhetoric or a structure of the texts.
Well, of course, I mentioned earlier the Apocalypse. The book of Revelation is literarily an apocalypse. So that's the most obvious example.
Yeah.
I think the another one that's quite outstanding is the Gospel of Mark.
Oh, really?
And here I would refer you to the work that Joel Marcus has done in his massive commentary on the Gospel of Mark. And I mean apocalypse in this larger sense, not in a literary framework as an apocalypse is a text that in which I claim that God has revealed something to me. I think there are apocalyptic elements certainly in Mark. Really, in all of the Gospels, if you look at the way, and here I'm thinking about a book that Phil Ziegler has coming out this fall on Satan in the Gospels.
You mean this one, right?
Yeah,
from Joel Marcus.
Exactly, from Joel Marcus.
What's the other one? Philip Ziegler?
Philip Ziegler has a book coming out this fall called God's Adversary and Ours.
Whoa.
Yeah, in which
I'm not sure if it's already there.
It may not be yet. I can send you some information about it later. I can't do that.
Please, I would appreciate that. Yeah.
But what he's doing is showing the adversarial character of of Satan in the Gospels in relationship to Jesus and us, and how that becomes an important element in understanding the resistance to the gospel. I'm not doing his argument justice at all at the moment, but I think what he's doing is insisting that people look theologically at what that language does.
Yeah. Now the Gospels. That's why I think you have given me another reason to be. I have the problems because I'm not a scholar. You have just given me another reason to be even fonder of the apocalyptic perspectives. I mean, the Gospels. That's because that gives me, more food for thought in viewing the Gospels, not the traditional way. And I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. What do you call it? I'm not a poo-pooing the traditional ways gospel has been interpreted. But again, this is there are many other things to the Gospels that we might be missing, and scholars like Beverly and some others, by putting this kind of content in their writings, they are giving us more arguments, details that we need to take in consideration when interpreting the Gospels as they were interpreted in the first century? I mean, I don't know, Beverly, but perhaps this is too idealistic on my part. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I'm more interested in first understanding the Gospels the way they were understood in the first century, and then we can. I'm not an enemy of application or okay, this parable of Jesus may ring true to my reality that I'm living now. I'm not an enemy of that, but I'm more interested, first of all, in terms of priority. I'm more interested in understanding the Gospels the way they were understood in the first century, so that I can interpret it more accurately and more efficiently. I don't know what you can say about that, if it's correct to do that, or I might be missing something there.
Well, I think I mean, that's how I was taught, and that's how I taught people often. And I
Okay.
think we want to be historically responsible, right? Which is what
Yeah.
you're saying. I think we have to be a little cautious. Sometimes people get carried away and think that they really can, Ernst Käsemann has a footnote where he says New Testament scholars sometimes think they can hear the grass grow and the bed bugs cough. We think we can get at, we know the first century better than they did. And of course,
no, we don't. Yeah.
we don't get out of our own heads, right? We still go with our own experiences.
Definitely.
At the same
Definitely.
time, I think we have to be, we try to be historically responsible.
Yeah.
So earlier when I was talking about the use of that Greek word paradidomi, I spent a lot of time trying to see how contemporaneous literature in Paul's literature contemporary with Paul would use that word, right? So that I was interpreting it responsibly, not just making up anything I wanted to make up.
So what you're saying is that what I can understand is that there are some limitations from us trying to get at the root of what historically happened. So we need to be honest
Modest.
and
Right.
and not assume that we better know what they did in the past.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the fourth question. This is getting good. So let me put it right here on your screen, Beverly. So, what's a common, as you know, Beverly, if you're within scholarly circles, your stuff is going to be challenged, improved, criticized, but that's okay, right? As long as it's an informed, educated, respectful criticism, that's fine.
Absolutely.
So, what's a common pushback or criticism? I forgot to put an S right there. Or criticism, these perspectives faced from scholars who don't necessarily align with any apocalyptic reading of any given passage in the New Testament.
Well, I don't, I'm going to talk about Romans or Paul, because I don't think I can do justice to that big of a question.
Fair enough.
But I think the most common concern, the way you hear it put, and actually I put it much earlier in my career, is that an apocalypse, when you talk about, see, I'm using my hand like this, when you talk about an intrusion, right, that is disruptive, then what happens to Israel? Does that mean that Israel, some people have characterized this as Marcionite, even that, there's no interest in the Old Testament, or that Israel is disregarded. And I will say, I think that I can understand how people get that. I think it's actually quite unfair. But the difference would be that as an apocalyptic, as somebody, what I see in this work is that when Paul talks about the gospel, the way I put it earlier, it talks about an event that's where God has acted in Jesus, and that has implications for everything, right? And that means when Paul reads scripture, he doesn't read it the same way he used to read it. When Paul thinks about Israel, he doesn't think about Israel in the same way. That doesn't mean that Israel is disregarded.
No.
But it does mean that he thinks from cross and resurrection back. Okay. A number of other scholars find that problematic and want to argue that for Paul, Jesus may fulfill and may revise expectations, but really Jesus is understood in light of Israel, not the other way around. Now, of course, the interpretation moves in two directions, right?
Yeah.
Once Paul talks about Isaiah, then Isaiah influences what he says. But the question is really, has Israel been set aside, or has Israel been disregarded? And I think that's not fair.
Yeah.
I think that's not correct. But then, people will always disagree. A different way of putting this is you're familiar with the Paul within Judaism discussion.
Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for some people in that circle, as I see it, Paul can only be understood in light of what we know about first century Judaism. So his understanding of Jesus has to conform to what we know about first century Judaism. My response is, yes, Paul is a Jew. He's never anything but a Jew. But once you are convinced that God has acted in this human, Jesus, in death and resurrection, then that becomes your form of Judaism, right? And you don't necessarily follow the same understanding of the law or scripture or the Messiah that you had prior. So it's really a question, to put it simply, of which interprets which.
Okay. There you have it. I mean, but this is something that I have discussed in layman circles, not a scholarly, which we can have a bit of a, what do you call it? We can have a bit of a freedom, not afraid that, okay, we need to be careful, not doing this, not writing about this, something like that. So something that I always get pushback on the apocalyptic is like, well, Paul is not axiomatic that he is using as a framework any apocalyptic interpretation. My response is, well, he may not state it like you wish, but that's why you need to be more sensitive to the language. That's why the original languages are important. And my response is a bit of like what do you call it? I throw a little bit of wicked humor. I think it's because of my grandfather. He used to be that way, but I'm doing it in a very, very candid way, not to offend people. And my response is, well, that's why reading this ancient text like the New Testament, you need to go and do it in the original. I mean, it's really paid off if you do it in the original language, because that will slow you down first, and second, you will be able to detect that kind of language that for some reason, I'm not saying translation do a bad job. No, they do a good job, trust me. But if you can learn the language, you can be more sensitive to what's the rhetoric, what's the language, what's this nuance that the author is using, and then you can argue about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
What would you say to that, Beverly?
I think that's very good advice, especially
thank
your
you.
comment about slowing down, because sometimes, we read scripture and we know what it says. So we just,
just skimming through
we already know. And sometimes it's as simple as reading, if you don't want to learn Greek, at least, or Hebrew, at least read a different translation, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
So that you get different interpretations of it. And it helps you to slow down and to think a little better.
Thank you. So now that Beverly, she's giving me the backup, she's backing me up, so I'm good.
Right.
Okay, so Beverly, let's go with the last question. We're doing pretty good with the time because I like to value my interviewees time. So last but not least, Beverly, what other books would you recommend for anyone interested in going deeper on the apocalyptic perspectives with an S at the end?
Well, I think at the moment, the best overview, it's really a good book, is by Jamie Davies, Davies, Davies.
Let me put it right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Apocalyptic Paul.
Yeah. I think it's with Cascade.
It is with Cascade. It's a highly readable survey of some of the people I've mentioned, and probably some people I forgot to mention, and their perspective on this question. And it's
right here.
And it doesn't hesitate to raise hard questions, but it's very fair. Yep, there it is. It's very balanced in its approach, and I think that's probably the best place to start.
Okay. And yeah, look at this. It's in Kindle for those who may not have the resources to have a physical copy.
Right.
You can go and purchase a $3 Kindle version.
Good.
Go for it.
Good.
Thank you. Now look at this. This is a good thing. I appreciate scholars plugging some other scholars' book when it's convenient and reasonable. So yeah, the Apocalyptic Paul, retrospect and prospect, Cascade Library of Pauline Studies. Okay, so do you have any other literature that you might recommend, or this is the best for very broad audiences?
If you want, I don't like plugging my own books, but I'm going to.
Go ahead. We're gonna plug your own book.
If you'd like to see something reasonable and readable that goes through a lot with a single text, then I have a little book called When in Romans that I published 9 years ago. And I think that was written, I wrote that for a fairly broad audience, and the response I've had from people is that it's highly readable.
Yeah. What better criticism than from the people itself who's reading this stuff? That's very. There you have it.
There it is.
When in Romans, an invitation to linger with the gospel according to Paul. Oh, I love this. Let me put it right here a little bit to zoom it out. Yeah. Like the cover.
Thank you.
What is this place? I think I know this place.
That is I forget what century, 50th century.
I thought it was the Vatican.
It is Rome.
Oh, it is Rome. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was not that lost. Yeah. Yeah, so people go ahead. It's really affordable. It's readable, as Beverly just said to us. So you need to go and I'm gonna have to add this to my wish list as well. People, my birthday is approaching, it's drawing closer. So please keep in mind you can give a gift. Definitely. Okay, Beverly, that's all the questions that I have today for you. I enjoyed this interview. I could spend hours with you.
I've really enjoyed talking with you, Marth. Thank you very much for your interest in my work and for a good conversation.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, to the audience, thank you guys. We're going to be, as always, don't worry. For you, remember, subtitles may take a while, from a couple of hours, because it all depends on the length of the interview. So, we're talking about 1 hour. So, it takes a while. But once it's good to go, you're going to be able to watch it with subtitles in your own language. No worries. And that way you won't be missing this interview about the Apocalyptic Paul. So just to remind you about our future interviews, Richard Averbeck from Trinity is coming to the show to talk about Pentateuch research and some other stuff. Very interesting. Also, we're going to have James B. Prothro. I hope I'm pronouncing correct his last name. We're going to be talking about justification, which is a big theme, right, Beverly, on Paul?
Absolutely.
Justification. So just keep an eye on that. And just to appreciate your support, thank you. We enjoy doing this. I love interviewing people like Beverly and some others. I just love doing that. I mean, I can do it for free if I can get shelter and food. Definitely. So Beverly, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Mar. The pleasure is mine.
Bye, people. Have a nice day. Bye now.